The average bar or restaurant that includes mocktails on their menu increase their sales by up to $3,500 per year. But then bars and restaurants that put in an actual program increase their sales between $8,500 and $13,000 per year.
I'm Joy Manning, and this is Edible Potluck, a podcast that gives food lovers a taste of Edible Communities magazines. Today, we've got a conversation with Edible Maine contributing writer Genevieve Morgan about survival gardening and how growing your own food can provide some comfort when you're feeling especially bleak about the state of our world. And then we have a conversation with Jesse Hawkins, founder of the Lousiville-based Mocktail Project, about his quest to create a safer, more inclusive drinking environment in bars, restaurants, and anywhere people gather around drinks. But before we dig in, as you look back on the summer, let me ask you, have you made enough pickles? It's a great way to store the season, even if you don't can per se. You can make refrigerator pickles and keep them for a few weeks in the fridge. It's easy. I'm especially feeling radish pickles right now. They're crunchy and spicy and spark up a lot of different dishes. Edible Capital District has got a quick, easy recipe if you want to give it a try too. It's a flexible recipe. You choose your favorite vinegar and whatever spices you like and have on hand. You probably have everything you need right now to make it except maybe those daikon radishes. Give it a try and let me know how you use them up. I like to dice them into a salad. You'll find a link to this recipe in the show notes for today's episode at ediblecommunities.com/podcast. According to writer Genevieve Morgan, we all may be starving by the year 2050. At least that's how she opened her article, Survival Gardening, in the spring issue of Edible Maine. She warns that in the face of the instability of natural and man-made disasters, widespread food scarcity could be more likely than we think. She does have hope, though. She offers a helpful strategy to guard against those dark possibilities. Gardening. When I read her piece, I had to know more, and she's here to tell me more about it today. Genevieve, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Joy. I really love being here and talking about this subject.
So how did you get interested in this?
Well, I have to say, I'm a city girl. I grew up in Manhattan, and, growing your own food or foraging was about me going downstairs to the deli to get a bagel and cream cheese.
Right.
So I do not come to it naturally, but my mother was born on a farm and was raised on a farm, and on holidays we would go, and I have had the extreme pleasure of sitting down to a meal that has been completely grown on your own property, and that was at my grandmother's. And I also, way back in the day, I come from Norwegian farmers, so I keep thinking that somewhere deep in my blood the farming vein runs deep. But this was really about trying to address my own anxiety about climate catastrophe and what we're all going to do in 50 years when not only are we going to be facing possible huge historic weather catastrophe, which we're already seeing. I mean, the Midwest has been flooding, but also increased challenges for fresh water supply, changes in temperature, rising sea levels. You go to bed at night and you start thinking, what can I do? I have children. And one of the things I thought that I could do was learn to grow my own food, since we all need to eat.
Your article does strike a light tone, but you're pretty serious about this, it sounds like.
Well, I think that we're all trying to figure out what we can do on a personal level, or at least, there are some people obviously who don't believe this is happening. I read an article in Forbes. It actually was an optimistic article in the end, but there was a big doomsday scenario about the lack of non-renewable energy sources like oil that are feeding into our agricultural system. And also the big thing is a fresh water supply. We may not realize it in the Northeast, but most of the fresh water that we have goes towards irrigating crops. And if we start to have water shortages, crops are going to be one of the first things. And this is not only in America, it's more dangerous in developing countries where there is even more people. So in the next 50 years, the population is going to keep going, and we're going to be facing more and more challenges. One thing that we can all learn to do is grow some of our own food.
Now let's define the survival garden. How does that differ from somebody else's garden?
Well, I got the term survival garden really from victory gardens in World War II. I was thinking about how a lot of the news articles and the scientists are saying we're going to have to mobilize like we did in World War II. So I went and I looked at how did people get food in World War II? And it turns out that in the US, 40% of the food that kept our country going during World War II was grown in victory gardens, backyard gardens. So that led me to think, wow, I've never grown my own food. Could I do it? And then I bought a book by Mel Bartholomew called Square Foot Gardening, which is a really great way to start small. It's like container gardening, but it's a little bigger. And conceivably, you can do it anywhere where you have at least 10 feet by 6 feet in full sun.
I live in a row home in a city, and my backyard is really just a concrete slab. I think I do have 10 feet by 6 feet. Can I do it?
Yes. I mean, you would have to put in some investment because you'd probably have to build a raised bed of, maybe 2 feet tall to prep the earth. Plants need soil. So you would have to give them enough soil to grow down as well as up. But the interesting thing about square foot gardening is it is very intensive. So you plant plants close together. You have to feed them, but you can grow them vertically. And another really cool thing that people are doing, if you go online, you can Google this, is vertical gardening, where they basically, like in cities, hang gardens off of the sides of houses. It's really neat. And you have to think small. I mean, I have a friend here who has a big garden, and she comes over and looks at my square foot garden and says, "Oh, that'll be nice. You'll get like 4 cabbages and 5 snap peas." But my intent in all of this was to teach myself how to do this. And then possibly, if I get good at it, expand, and be able to take on a bigger garden that could feed more people. I mean, if you have 2 4x4 foot squares, you can get enough vegetables if you do successive plantings to feed a family of 2. So you need a bigger space. I mean, if you're only going to use your own vegetables.
For people that haven't heard of this before, can we explain the whole concept of square foot gardening?
Yes. So square foot gardening, if you notice, if you even go online and look at raised beds, you'll see that they come in a certain size. Now, some are like 2 feet by 6 feet, or some are 4 by 4. And that's because the idea is you have a square or a rectangle. And in square foot gardening, you carve out a 12 by 12 square for each crop. So for instance, in the one I'm growing right now, in one square, I have, one 4 by 4 garden bed, I have 16 squares. And in each square, I have a different crop. So I have celery, which is growing really well, actually. Peas, I have a cabbage, and I have maybe 6 cabbages in that one square. I have more peas because peas are smaller, so they take up less space, but I'm also trying to train them to grow up. Carrots, I have like maybe 16 carrots growing right now, but you can pull those and then plant more seeds after you pull them. I have some arugula, and I have some radishes, which are the best vegetable for a beginner gardener to start with because they grow really well. You pull them up and you feel so proud of yourself when you actually have a radish.
I love radishes.
You can't believe it.
So this is your first year out.
Yes.
And how did you decide what to plant?
Honestly, I ordered a heirloom garden packet online. I wanted to get heirloom seeds. And so basically, if you are at all thinking about global catastrophe, there's a lot of sites online to help you. And I said I wanted to plant a survival garden, and there's actually a whole genre here. And there was a packet that came that had heirloom seeds of what I'm calling larder vegetables, which are vegetables that you can survive off of. So they're not fancy necessarily, but they're the stuff that we human beings have been living off of forever, like squash and corn and beans. And then I did supplement like with the arugula. The arugula wasn't in the heirloom, but I did it because I liked it.
Right. I mean, it seems like if you're going to go to the trouble of doing this, you should plant some things that you like to eat. I mean, I like to eat all of those things. I will be the first to say a vegetable doesn't have to be glamorous for me to love it. But
well, and the thing that's interesting, I mean, the other thing that I should say is that at least where I live, which is in Maine, there are a number of community-supported agricultural farms that are run by local farmers. So one thing that you can do if you don't feel like you are up to gardening your own vegetables, which I think everybody should try to do, even if you just do it in a potted bed, or they have earth boxes, which are just plastic tubs, 4 by 4 with a little raised shelf so that the plants don't sit in water. It's just to do it because this is a skill we all should have. I mean, it's probably, aside from finding fresh water, the most important skill that humans can have, which is to grow their own food or find their own food. But I do encourage, and I will probably supplement my small bed by joining a CSA this summer, because at least you know that the vegetables are being grown locally by local farmers. My worry is more not only availability of food in the future, and I'm talking 50 years from now, but stresses on transportation of food, on shipping food. So, I think the days are waning when we're just going to be able to get in the car and drive to a major supermarket and expect there to be this plethora of food choices. That may be kind of, Cassandra-ish of me, but I think that we've seen, I said in the article about the romaine lettuce scare that happened, and then there was a scare about pork, and more as regulations are shifting and things are falling apart, we may find that in the next 25 to 50 years, we can't rely on the food supply as we have been. So even if you can't or you don't want to grow your own right away, I do recommend it as just a hobby because it's also really fun and you get really attached to the plants. And like I talk to my plants all the time. My kids think I'm crazy, but you can then also join a CSA and get fresh, local, sometimes organic vegetables.
So if you're like me and you're looking at your space, how do you assess the light? Because there's certain light requirements.
Yeah, I mean, that was tough for me because I built the beds in May and the trees in Maine hadn't fully leafed out. And I'm seeing now that what I thought was going to be like 8 to 12 hours of sun is more like 7 because the leaves have come. So I'm still working with that. I think the most open spot that you can possibly find in your yard is the best. And then you need to read the back of your...
shade it. You're saying?
Yeah, the least shaded.
The sunniest.
But like there are certain crops, and this is where you start to go deep into the gardening world, but there are certain crops like lettuce and cooler weather vegetables that can handle more shade. So if you have a shadier spot, you just have to actually look on the back of the seed packet and see what they say. Things like tomatoes, if you think of warm climate vegetables and fruits like cantaloupe, tomatoes, peppers, those are all, they need a lot of sun. They need a lot of heat and sun.
And what about the soil quotient? You write in your article about healthy soil. As I mentioned, I don't have any soil. In the cities, a lot of times the soil is not really usable. So like, where do you get your dirt?
Well, you can get your dirt if if you're strong and you can like tote it with a wheelbarrow or something, you can just order like a big pile of organic dirt to come to your, and like they'll dump it on your block or your street corner, and you can find things. I mean, there's, at least in Maine, even at the recycling center where people bring their green debris, they sell loam. They sell loamy soil. Otherwise, you just have to buy it at a garden store or a Lowe's or a Home Depot in bags. And generally they come, this gets very deep into soil composition, but soil basically has nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium in it. And there's also acidic soil and clay soil and sandy soil. And if you buy the soil from your hardware store to start out, let's say you're going to have a small bed, then you can be pretty sure that it's going to work. I mean, that next year you might have to amend it depending on what you put in there. And then I also think that I have been feeding my garden, can use compost tea. Like I've got plant food and I feed.
What is compost tea?
Compost tea is if you have a compost pile, you have to basically take the finest compost and you put it in the bottom of your watering can and you fill the rest with water. And because the plant, what I've just learned, this is something I learned literally this week, is the kind of plant food that you might sprinkle on the soil or, put into the soil, like plant spikes, like, fertilizer spikes, takes a lot of time, even with organic fertilizer, for the plants to uptake that. The best way to feed your plants is with a liquid fertilizer.
It sounds like you're really learning a lot as you go through this first year. About how much time per day are you spending on this project?
Well, every morning I walk out with my coffee and I check them. And then I decide what I need to do. And like today I went out and I saw, because I've not done any pest control because I'm trying to grow organically. Because again, I'm thinking, what did our primordial ancestors use? They didn't have pesticide. So today I realized I have to go and research organic pest control because some of my leaves are getting eaten.
Oh yeah. I grow basil for the pests, apparently. Yeah. I do have a pot of basil and it's gone. They just eat it.
I know. So I have heard, and I don't know if this works, we'll have to check in a month, but that you can put dish soap in a spray bottle and spray the leaves with soapy water. The other big thing that I want to say I did this year, which I'm a big advocate of, is I rented water barrels from my city water supply. And I have 2 water barrels and they are overflowing with water right now.
They collect rain.
And my hope is that when the dry months come, which will be August and September, then I can use them to help water my garden sustainably.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know Maine is somewhat colder than where I am in southeastern Pennsylvania, but are you harvesting food yet?
I've harvested radishes and I've harvested a couple carrots, and I have spinach, and I have my sunflowers, which I grew in the corners of my bed, are starting to grow, like put out little florets. I am about to harvest some lettuce and arugula. We've had a really slow spring.
Mm-hmm.
So
because of temperatures?
Because of rain and cold weather.
Okay.
I mean, 3 weeks ago, it was only 50 degrees here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're having a very schizophrenic spring where it's rainy, cold, 50s, 60s, and then we'll have one day in the 80s. And that's not great for growing vegetables. They like homeostasis. They like warm sun.
Right.
And, every other day or every 2 days getting watered. Mostly I'm just having fun with it. I'm trying to keep it fun and light and not too high maintenance.
And, your garden is growing in the shadow of your anxiety about, the end of the world. So you get a gold star for keeping it fun.
Yes. I will say this, though, that it's an amazing antidote to that anxiety. I mean, rather than going on Facebook, take the time that you might go on Facebook or Twitter to read all those catastrophic articles and put it into growing something and building something. And it's amazing how it balances out your anxiety, because in the end, we are going to have to face whatever challenges, and you might as well try to grow some skills, and then hopefully you'll get some food along with it.
Now, it's probably too late for people to get started on their 2019 survival garden. So When should they start for next year? What does that look like in terms of time?
I would definitely think about just going either to the library or wherever and checking out Mel Bartholomew's book. It's a pretty old book. It should be in the library, though.
Can you say the title again?
It's called Square Foot Gardening. It's St. Martin's Press, 1981, and the author's name is Mel Bartholomew. I think he also has a website, but I didn't check that out because I already had his book. Mm-hmm. And if you like the idea of square foot gardening, or even if you want to have a bigger garden, like you want to go down and right now what you could do is put your name down for a community gardening plot, especially in your situation where you might not feel great about doing it in your backyard. If your community has that, generally those are in really sunny areas. They have a communal water supply, like a hose, and you can just rent one bed there and the dirt's already there. So you can try all these skills out there. It can be a little daunting because there are some great gardeners. So if you're just starting out, They could possibly be a little like, okay. But what I would do is, and what I did do, was start dreaming and get a piece of draft paper or quad paper and mark out the size of your bed and mark out your squares and think about what you might want to plant. Maybe do a little research on when they grow and how they best grow and how much light they need. And then when you feel like you have your perfect setup, order the seeds. And then you can use the winter, if you have a sunny window or something like that, to start trying to grow your seeds. Now, the next step for me is figuring out if I can allow some of my vegetables to flower and then collect the seeds, because that's the true beauty of heirloom seeds, is that they're supposed to self-propagate. Mm-hmm. But you do have to be confident enough to gather the seeds, dry them, and save them for replanting next winter. And I'm not sure I'm at that stage yet. We'll see.
It is only your first season, so you could be forgiven if you're not doing the perfect seed saving this time out.
It's true.
But hopefully by 2050, you'll have a robust seed library all your own. And you'll be helping your neighbors.
Maine is a good place to do that, but I will have to take pictures of my garden as it grows and send them to you. So
I would love that. It's really inspiring to me. I don't have much of a green thumb, but I would certainly like to grow my own food in a raised bed or in my neighborhood. So thank you for the inspiration, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That was Genevieve Morgan, a Maine-based author and editor and host of the Spectrum Cable TV show, The Writer's Zone. We'll link to her Edible Maine article in the show notes for this episode, and you can learn more about her work at ga-morgan.com. A recovering alcoholic, Jesse Hawkins doesn't mess with alcohol. But like a lot of people who don't want booze, he still wants a complex, festive, and grown-up drink when he goes out with friends. That's exactly why he started the Mocktail Project in 2017. I read about Jesse in Edible Lousiville and the Bluegrass in the story Mocktails Grow Up. And he's here to tell us more about why zero-proof beverages are important. Thanks for joining us, Jesse.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tell me more about the Mocktail Project. What exactly does it do, and how did you get started?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I made the personal choice to become a non-drinker just a little over 5 years ago in April of 2014. And 3 years ago, I stepped away from my personal job and I started the Mocktail Project, which is a mission-based nonprofit focused on creating social environments where cocktails and mocktails can coexist, but really just helping to create more inclusivity, whether you do drink, don't drink, or just taking a break. And then through our mission, we help to support things like recovery in the hospitality industry and really just helping to provide alternative options in social environments that we don't think of or I don't think of being inclusive, like the Kentucky Bourbon Trail and working with distilleries and environments like that, really to help to provide alternative options.
I mean, I think that's so important because whether maybe you're pregnant, maybe you have a early workout in the morning, everybody still wants to feel included and have fun together. So that's one part of your project that really appeals to me. And how has it been received in the bar and restaurant community where you are there in Lousiville?
It's so interesting because Kentucky in and of itself, our mayor says it all the time. Kentucky does a few things really well, but tourism is really not our tagline. It's bourbonism rather than tourism. So it's been a really interesting aspect working directly with distilleries, bars, restaurants, and helping to provide those alternative options and really just empower social environments, to be more mindful and be more inclusive. And as you mentioned, there's a million reasons why an individual may choose not to drink. And really the approach that I take is that whether you do drink or don't drink, every time we, order a water or a sweet tea or a lemonade, we're a non-drinker in that moment. And so how do we elevate that experience and really, start that conversation on, when I choose not to drink, why do I choose not to drink? And then, having those options that we feel comfortable holding something in our hand in those social environments, so that we don't feel pressured or feel like we need to have a drink if we don't want to.
So, I also don't drink alcohol. You and I have connected on the wide world of sober Instagram.
Yep.
And, I feel strongly about restaurants having non-alcoholic options, but I talk to restaurant owners and bar managers about this, and I get a lot of pushback, actually. They'll say, just drink water, or we have Diet Coke, or whatever. So I think that there's this attitude that it's not important. Why do you think it matters? And what do you think restaurants and bars can get out of doing it? Like, what's in it for them?
Sure. So I think, and personally for me, I've always kind of viewed this as gluten-free. When you looked at that movement 5 to 10 years ago, really, truly only spaces that really had a really good culinary scene started to integrate gluten-free options. And now you look at 5 to 10 years later, like a McDonald's has a gluten-free option now. And, I think the important piece and the piece that gets missed is that just because maybe I don't drink doesn't mean that my father or my brother who, loves bourbon or loves a good cocktail, I'm going to go support social environments that's going to have an option for myself, my pregnant friend, my brother who does drink. And so you may miss out on an entire order of individuals that does consume alcohol just because you don't provide an option for myself who doesn't consume alcohol. And so it's really truly being mindful, not only to the consumer that does, but then, going above and beyond that of how do we keep those individuals in social environments longer? And for that longevity piece, I'm only going to sit down and drink one Coca-Cola. But if you have 2 or 3 really great alternative options, I may stay for a longer time period. And usually when I'm in those social environments, I'm going to buy a friend a cocktail. I'm going to order another appetizer. And I think that when you look at social environments that does it really well, they talk so much about how individuals stay longer, they promote it more, they bring more guests into those social environments, not because, all bars already have wine, beer, cocktails, but they're providing that alternative option, being mindful for the non-consumer, which, is the pregnant mother, the person that's doing dry January, the person in recovery, or maybe it's just Tuesday and we have a big meeting on Wednesday and we just want to take a break tonight.
Right. That makes so much sense. So I think you and I are on the same page where it's not just the right thing to do, but I think that and it sounds like you think that there's money to be made for businesses.
I truly believe so. And I forget the article that just wrote it. I believe it was maybe New York Times. And they said the average bar or restaurant that includes at least 3 mocktails on their menu increase their sales by up to $3,500 per year. But then bars and restaurants that put in an actual program to where they promote it on social media, where they train their staff on how to upsell individuals from water or tea to, $6, $7, $8 mocktail, increase their non-alcoholic sales between $8,500 and $13,000 per year.
That's amazing. That's really good, I think, for the food community to know that people who don't want to drink alcohol still want to buy beverages and still have money.
Sure. And I think from my perspective, what I always share and talk about is, as a consumer, I was already used to spending $8 to $13 for a cocktail because that was my drink of choice. And I wanted that experience, and I wanted to watch the bartender to bring over and craft and walk over a drink. That money is still there to be spent. And so as a consumer of alcohol, I still want to have that same great experience and still have something brought over to me. I still don't mind paying for a great experience. And I think that's the piece that gets missed.
I actually prefer it because if I'm spending around the same amount of money on a non-alcoholic cocktail as my friends who are having regular cocktails, there's not that weird moment when the bill comes and somebody's like, oh, Joy didn't drink, So I actually prefer it. It's really normalizing. I think restaurants overlook that to some extent. And I do think that's a really great part about the Mocktail Project and what you're doing. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't ask you about your choice of name and the word mocktail itself.
Sure.
It's kind of a hot button issue. A lot of people don't love the word, but you've clearly embraced it. Can you tell me more about how you feel about the word mocktail to describe craft non-alcoholic beverages?
Sure. So if you actually go to the mocktailproject.com, there's a tagline in there that says, whether you prefer the term mocktail, spirit-free, or non-alcoholic cocktail, our mission is about creating spaces where they can all coexist and really helping to provide alternative options. I chose the word mocktail because it's the most universally recognized, and it's also in Webster's dictionary. When you go to Webster's, there's cocktails and there's mocktails. So I simply chose the term for our mission on what would be the most recognized, rather than trying to, pick a term that everyone enjoys or likes. Personally, I really, truly don't care. I want to have an alternative option. I don't care if it's called spirit-free. And that's really where, for us as a mission, I want to empower a restaurant or a social environment to be authentic to who they are, and really picking a term that, they prefer. But then, how do I then promote what they're doing, whether it's spirit-free, non-alcoholic cocktail, sans is starting to become a term, but the reality of it is that I just want to have an alternative option on the menu. And so I picked the most recognizable term worldwide.
That makes sense. I have mixed feelings about the word mocktail, but I'm always happy to see them list it that way on a menu because I know I'm going to get something to drink.
Exactly.
So you've partnered with some unlikely groups, at least at first glance, including the Kentucky Distillers Association. Seems like a sort of a weird alliance between someone who is a recovering alcoholic and, an advocate for those in recovery and, a huge, let's call them big booze.
Sure.
So how did that happen?
Well, again, being Kentucky based, I had to take a hard look both at myself and also, really truly the landscape. And the reality is that most individuals don't know that brands like, say, a Brown-Forman actually has an internal team set up that if an employee is struggling with alcoholism or other substance abuse, they have resources. They spend so much money, time, and they're truly so thoughtful on creating a healthier drinking culture. And the same goes with the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which is the Kentucky Distillers Association, on helping to provide alternative options, really creating a better drinking culture as a whole. When you look at a great spirit, none of those brands put something on a shelf that sits there and ages 6, 8, 10, 15 years to then have a consumer black out. They want them to truly enjoy it. And so I think the biggest misconception is that, yes, they are a business. Yes, they do want to sell alcohol, but they also don't want people to get in a car and drive after they've been drinking. And so really, what I took as a holistic approach is saying alcohol is never going to go away and alcohol is not the problem. It was my own personal choice in how I abused alcohol from my own insecurities and doubts. And so how do we provide an alternative option that can be paired with a great cocktail and in social environments that if you're going to have an open bar with these great spirits, let's also be just as mindful on the other side of providing great alternative options. And so, that's really been my approach from the beginning, because I don't think we should ever put, alcohol on one side and say, let's just do away with that and just play over here on non-alcoholic sides. Like, let's coexist and let's create spaces where everyone can feel comfortable. Again, whether you do drink, don't drink, or you just want to take a break.
Obviously, Kentucky is a big part of who you are and a big part of what has informed your nonprofit and the Mocktail Project. But I think that every city in America and everywhere could benefit from the Mocktail Project.
Completely agree.
Do you have plans to expand your reach?
Yes. So if there's any team members out there that believes in the mission, then, definitely contact me. I can speak just from this past week. I just got back from a music festival in Michigan. So I was just at Electric Forest putting in their first non-alcoholic space, both on the hospitality side and for the guests. I'm going down to Tales of the Cocktail next week. And then, ironically, Brown-Forman and some other spirit brands have sent me all across the country doing things like whiskey festivals and different events and really helping to provide that alternative option. But the big one that could really, truly expand into different environments is in October, we host a spinoff of like a Negroni week, to where for 1 week, we empower as many bars and restaurants to put one mocktail on their chalkboard, promote it, share it, put it on social media. It's free to participate, but it's really a project to get the conversation started on why it's important to be mindful and have alternative options. And then if you do want to make a charitable donation to our mission, we then help to support things like Ben's Friends and different avenues and recovery groups across the nation.
Well, I think that is just terrific, and I hope it really catches on more and more. And, I want it where I live, and I want everyone to have options for a safer drinking culture.
Sure.
So I know you focus mostly on being in social environments, but do you make mocktails at home for yourself?
I do. Yeah, it's definitely, it's something. I didn't come from the bartending world, spent many hours at the bar, but I do love playing around and messing around with different recipes.
Before I let you go, can you share your best advice on making a great mocktail at home?
Definitely start with fresh ingredients, because we don't have that base ingredient like a vodka or a bourbon or whatever that may be. I love playing around with different simple syrups. I think that's the easiest and most complex way for, whether you're an amateur or a skilled bartender, but really just getting around and playing with different profiles. And really, truly for me, I look at it as an extension of culinary. So just pairing different flavor profiles that could work. So I dig into my mother's recipes and look through her cookbooks to try and get inspired.
That's great advice. I call them not so simple syrups because I like to put herbs and things in them.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Jesse. I really love getting an update on what's going on with the Mocktail Project, and I hope that we'll get to talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
That was Jesse Hawkins of the Mocktail Project. We'll link to the article, Mocktails Grow Up from Edible, Lousiville, and the Bluegrass in the show notes for today's episode. Follow him on Instagram at the Mocktail Project. Thank you for joining us today on Edible Potluck. Our podcast producer is David Wolf. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please take a moment to leave us a rating or a review. It helps other listeners find the podcast. Don't forget to pick up a copy of your own local edible magazine. If you don't know where to get one, find out at ediblecommunities.com. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes for this episode at ediblecommunities.com/podcast. Until next time, remember, eat local.